Okay. Supper is what time, Rabosai? For the guys that are in KBY East. Yoni looks hungry.
And a half
You have
hour.
45 minutes. Brother. We start Mariv at 7:30.
7:30. Okay. Jim's Yom Haatzmaut, they have a festive meal after Mariv, so I thought maybe you'd have a bit more time. But 7:30 is supper, you said?
No,
What
Mariv is at 7:30.
Mariv is 7:30.
Mariv is at 7:30.
And supper is? When's supper?
I assume 8ish.
8ish.
I assume 8ish.
We'll see when. Okay. There are a number of topics which are just before we begin this, a number of topics which I'd just like to discuss. I'd like to discuss a little bit about the significance of Eretz Yisrael in general within the Torah Hashkafa. I'd like to talk about the events that took place around the time of the establishment of the state and their significance. I'd like to discuss, although I don't know if we'll get to this part today, some of the machlokas that exists within observant Jews with respect to our approach to the state. Before we begin, also, let me point out that there's a book which I've recommended, a book called Zion Today, A Torah Perspective, which I don't know if you guys see backwards. Zion Today, A Torah Perspective, written by a fellow Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, should live and be well, which Kishmo Keno speaks about Eretz Yisrael with hashkafa of Chazal, a very worthwhile sefer, available in the library upstairs, and I hope Ezrat Hashem in the not too distant future we'll all be able to make it back to Eretz Yisrael and to that library. Okay. Know that the Ramban lists certain mitzvos in Sefer Mitzvos that he feels that the Rambam left out. One of them is the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. There's Hosafos to the Sefer Mitzvos. Hosafos to Mitzvos say, he writes that the Rambam should have listed the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And there he quotes some Sifri, I believe it is, that relates that there was some Talmidim that had studied in Eretz Yisrael. And then they were going to Chutz La'aretz, and they reached some place close to the border, and they were very upset at their having to leave Eretz Yisrael. According to one Girsa, they decided, in fact, not to leave. They tore their clothes, and they said some statement to the effect that Shkula Yishuv Eretz Yisrael connected Kala Mitzvah. That the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is Shkula, is weighty, is as weighty as the other mitzvahs. Shkula Yishuv Eretz Yisrael connected Kala Mitzvahs. What does that mean? So my friend Rabbi Yitzchak Twersky, Shlita, explained the following. He pointed out that there are a number of mitzvahs which Chazal say are shkula k'neged kol mitzvahs. What other mitzvahs Rabbi said you know are shkula k'neged kol mitzvahs?
Talmud Torah.
Talmud Torah, okay. Others?
Kivudavim.
Could be. I don't remember. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. Tzitzis, Easter Avodah Zarah. So how could you have so many mitzvahs that are shakol connected to mitzvahs? I don't know physics, but you can't have one mitzvah which is right. You put, so what does it mean that? So he explained that the idea is the following: you have certain mitzvahs that, as important as they are, there's no clear connection between that mitzvah and other mitzvahs. No clear connection between lulav and the rest of the Torah. No clear connection between shofar and the rest of the mitzvahs. On the other hand, there are some mitzvahs with respect to which there is a clear connection between them and the other mitzvahs of the Torah. For example, tzitzis, alaman tizku ba'asisem as kol mitzvah sai. the Easter Avodah Zarah. If a person does all the mitzvahs, but nevertheless, at the end of every day, he decides to bow down to some idol. He decides to spend a half hour in a church worshiping, I don't know who. Then of course the rest of the mitzvahs they lack meaning. So similarly, when Chazal speak of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael being Shakol Keneged Kol Mitzvahs, that means that the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is significant not only in and of itself, but also it adds more meaning to other mitzvahs. We're familiar with Ramban on the Sifri that understands that all mitzvahs, not only agricultural mitzvahs, but also those which are Chovas HaGuf, have more significance in Eretz Yisrael. We need to point out, it is clear that the Ramban agrees that mitzvahs are daraisa, those that are Chovas HaGuf, are daraisa even in Chutz La'aretz. That's most of the Pshita. There's nothing Ramban that would indicate otherwise. What's the nature of that obligation, how it compares to Eretz Yisrael, is something which is a separate discussion we'll go into now. But what's also clear in that Ramban is that he understands that mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael are a lot more meaningful than they are in Chutz La'aretz. The Ramban says this in connection, actually I think it's Ramban the end of Parshas Kedosh, which by the way, I hope Bezrat Hashem will have a chance to do Ramban this week, Bli Neder. Actually, maybe we'll think about the possibility of doing it on Friday morning instead of Thursday night. Guys, think about that, and we'll have to talk about that. In any case, so the pasuk says, we say in Parshas Vayam Shema, "V'samtem es dvarai ela al levavchem v'anafshechem, u'kshatem osam v'chulei." So after the psukim speak of the fact that if you violate the mitzvahs of the Torah, then Chas v'Shalom will be sent into Galus. The pasuk then says, "V'samtem es dvarai ela al levavchem u'kshatem osam." Then it speaks of the mitzvah of tefillin. So what is the connection between that which the pasuk says that if we sin, we're going to go into Galus, the mitzvah of tefillin? So says the Ramban, based on the Sifri, that there was a havamina, that once we leave Eretz Yisrael, we're no longer obligated to keep the mitzvahs. And says the Sifri that the pasuk is telling us that's not the case. Even when you go to Chutz La'aretz, you need to continue to keep the mitzvahs. So it's a havamina. The Sifri understands that once we're in Chutz La'aretz, no longer do we need to keep the mitzvahs due to the mitzvahs being more meaningful in Eretz Yisrael. Comes along the pasuk and says, no, that's not the case. That you need to keep the mitzvahs even in Chutz La'aretz. Now, so it would seem that you have a havamina that was totally rejected. But as we know, often there's a havamina that's rejected, but not totally. It would seem for the Ramban that the havamina is not totally rejected. What do I mean? Well, the Sifri gives a mashal to a king that it got angry at the queen, and he decided that for some amount of time she needs to be sent into exile. The king, before the queen leaves, indicates to her that he still loves her, he just feels that she needs to be punished, and he's interested at some point, he's interested in her coming back, and in fact, he tells her that she should keep herself beautiful for when he'll take her back. And along similar lines, says Zifri, that the Midrash tells us, that Chazal, the Psukim are telling us, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells the Jewish people, continue to do the mitzvahs when you're sent into Galus, so that you will be in shape, so that will be able to perform them properly when you come back to Eretz Yisrael. So the implication of the Midrash is that mitzvahs and chutzlah are sort of to stay in shape. Now, that does not detract from the importance, from the obligation to keep mitzvahs and chutzlah. Because whatever the rationale is for HaKadosh Baruch Hu being mitzvah us to keep the mitzvahs and chutzlah, that is an absolute tzibur. And as such, there is great meaning to it. So certainly, those guys in Kerem B'Yavneh West should not chas v'sholom be mezalzel in mitzvahs due to the fact that they are less meaningful than Eretz Yisrael. But let's keep in mind that those guys in that in Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvahs have more significance, more meaning. The actual nature of that warming. So that's something that maybe we'll discuss in the Ramban, and there's some article in Rabbi Twersky that I can send to those that would express some interest in that. We might have mentioned earlier in the year that Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, alav shalom, of one of the Gedolei Hadar of the previous generation, once when he visited Eretz Yisrael, so he davened on the plane, and then when the plane landed, he put on tefillin again, despite the fact that he had put on tefillin in the plane, and he explained that already he performed the mitzvah of tefillin that day, but then was tefillin chutz la'aretz, and now he wants to perform mitzvah of tefillin of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, we know, on a distinct point, we know that the concept of Klal Yisrael, the concept of tzibur, is much stronger in Eretz Yisrael rather than in chutz la'aretz. After all, Karban called Par He'alein Davar Shel Tzibur. Par He'alein Davar Shel Tzibur, which means that if the Sanhedrin Gadol issues an improper psak, the Bagatz issues an Lahavdil. If the Sanhedrin Gadol issues an improper psak, and most of the tzibur act based on that psak, then there's a karban that needs to be brought. Now, what does it mean, most of the tzibur? So the Gemara says most of the tzibur in Eretz Yisrael. So let's say you have 10 Jews in Eretz Yisrael and 10 million Jews in Chutz La'aretz. So halacha says that if most of Jews in Eretz Yisrael violated the psak of the Sanhedrin, then a karban paralahem davar shel tzibur is brought. We don't care about how many Jews in Chutz La'aretz violated the psak, because the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, they are called tzibur. In Hodu that we say every day, Hodu Lashem, Kru B'Shmo, Hodu B'Mim Alilosav. We speak of the great chesed, of the wonders of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the first thing we speak about there? Shekarasas Abraham B'Shvo Soli Yitzchak V'Amedel Yaakov Lechok Lecha Etena Es Eretz Canaan. In Sefer Bereshis, there is a clear correlation between being given Eretz Yisrael, the promise of Eretz Yisrael, and being the bearer of the tradition. When Yaakov is blessed by Yitzchak Avinu, before Yaakov is sent to Golus, sent to Haran, then Yitzchak tells him, "Tekel Shaddai Yeberechoscha, Yabrecha, Yarbecha, V'itein Lecha Es Berkas Abraham, L'Rishtecha Es Eretz Megurecha." Berkas Abraham, L'Rishtecha Es Eretz Megurecha. The blessing of Abraham, the blessing of being the bearer of the tradition, goes together with Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, as the Kuzari writes, is a place that has a spiritual climate to help a person grow spiritually. We know that there are certain species that only grow in certain places. If Mr. Man in England should decide to plant an esrog tree in his backyard, then probably it's not going to grow. If you try to plant a palm tree there in Cleveland, probably also not going to do so well. Maybe do have palm trees in Cleveland. But so just as certain plants have different places where they're able to grow well, so similarly, says the Kuzari, there are certain climates that are conducive to spiritual growth, and Eretz Yisrael is that climate. Of course, the gift of Eretz Yisrael is very much associated with the keeping the mitzvahs of the Torah. The pasuk says, at the end of Tehillim Kuf Hey, that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us Eretz Yisrael, Babur Yishmeru Chukav V'Sorosav Yinsaru. Hallelujah. Babur Yishmeru Chukav. The gift of Eretz Yisrael is so that we should be involved in Torah mitzvahs. And of course, we read at the end of the parsha that Chas v'Shalom, if we don't be Mekayim mitzvahs, then Chas v'Shalom, the land will evict us from Eretz Yisrael. Lo saki ha'aretz eschem. The relationship which the Jewish people have with Eretz Yisrael is something that throughout the generations the Jews cherished, and the connection that we have with the Eretz Yisrael is not just intellectual, it's also very much emotional. Jews throughout the generations dreamt about, wrote about, sang about, and had a great yearning for Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara tells us, the Rambam quotes this in the end of Parakeh V'Hilchos Malachim. Parenthetically, let's mention that although the Rambam, according to some, does not obligate one to live in Eretz Yisrael, nevertheless, he does indicate that something which is very important, of great value. Perhaps at some point we'll talk about that, the Machlokas Ramban and Rambam more. But in any case, the Rambam quotes the end of Parakeh of Malachim, the fact that Gedolei Yisrael would roll in the dust of Eretz Yisrael, that would express great chabibus for the earth, for the land of Eretz Yisrael, they would kiss the stones of the Holy Land. In the keynotes that we say on Tisha B'Av, those that are interested, maybe we'll go open up a keynote of Tisha B'Av at the end, see some of the keynotes written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi that expressed an amazing burning love for Eretz Yisrael, about the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, about the animals in Eretz Yisrael, the air, the dust in Eretz Yisrael. And of course, the love for Eretz Yisrael also expressed itself in actions. Jews throughout the generations tried to make their way to Eretz Yisrael in the most difficult of times. Keep in mind, nowadays it's relatively easy to make it to Eretz Yisrael. Just need to put on a mask and one of these special suits and get on a plane, if they're whatever. So it's not something which, generally speaking, was overly difficult throughout the generations. Travel, of course, you need to travel by boat, and boat travel is not very safe, or by land through countries that you weren't able to speak their language. To find out, you need to avoid identifying yourself as a Jew. You never knew when the guy was going to just kill you, and for all the reasons in the world, it was very difficult. But nevertheless, there were Jews in Eretz Yisrael from the time of Aliyas Ezra. There have been Jews in Eretz Yisrael throughout the generations. For whatever reason, the standard Zionist Israeli school books, that is not played up. There you have little or no mention of the fact that there were Jews in Eretz Yisrael from the time of Babel. You have little or no mention of the Talmidei Hagra, Talmidim Baal Shem Tov, that underwent unbelievable, undescribable hardship to make it and to live in Eretz Yisrael under the most difficult conditions. Rav Shlomo Fisher, should live and be well, from Yeshivat Itri, suggested that the halacha which says that the Kedusha of Olei Babel is forever, Kedusha of Olei Babel did not dissipate with the Churban. Perhaps that's due to the fact that there were always Jews in Eretz Yisrael, and thus that Kedusha was retained even when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Okay. Now I would like to go on. That was part one, a bit about the significance of Eretz Yisrael in general. Perhaps now, to begin at least part two of our discussion, and part two of our discussion will be somewhat based on an essay written by Rav Soloveitch Alav Shalom. This was an essay, I think, based on some drasha he gave, I think 8 years after the establishment of the state, at some the Mizrahi dinner convention. The name of the article is Kol Dodi Dovek. An expression, of course, from Shir HaShirim. The name, the reason why I chose that name, is presumably based on the fact that the Kuzari writes that those psukim in Shir HaShirim are some sort of mashal for what took place at the time of Olei Bavel. At the time of Olei Bavel, the psukim, after all, speak of the fact that the Dod, representing a Kadosh Baruch Hu, knocked on the door of the Jewish people, of the beloved. And the response was that, hey, too tired to get up, don't have energy. And by the time the Ra'ayah, by the time the Jewish people were willing to go and open the door, then already the Dode had left. And the Kuzari explains that's a mashal for at the time of Bayis Sheni, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, come back to Eretz Yisrael, and I will restore the Ashras HaShechina and all the Nisim. The Jewish people, they were somewhat comfortable in Babel, and by the time we realized what was happening, then already it was too late. So Rabbi Soloveitchik speaks of the fact that during those events, over 70 years ago, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was knocking at our door, and of course, we do have that responsibility, that obligation to respond that chas v'shalom, we don't have a recurrence of what took place at the time of Bayis Sheni. So he speaks of 6, 7 different knockings, so to speak, all sorts of different remarkable aspects of those events. At least for now, we will mention one. I hope Bezrat Hashem tomorrow maybe more. One remarkable knocking was on the battlefield from the military standpoint. Know that on Pesach, Halach says, Maschub Gerus B'Sayim B'Shevach. And one of the reasons for this, that we can only appreciate the Shevach if we understand the Gnus. Only if you realize how bad the situation was initially, can we understand, can we appreciate, can we value the Shevach. So we can only understand the significance of us being able to live as Jews in Eretz Yisrael. We understand the great danger that was present, the great danger that existed for the destruction, chas v'shalom, of the Yishuv of Eretz Yisrael before the establishment of the state. There is a very good book for those people that need bathroom reading, O Jerusalem, written by the Collins and Lapierre, that speaks of the events of the time of the War of the Independence. There are certain things there that, there's room for discussion whether they are accurate or not, but in any case, the book itself, overall, I think is nice to read. So in any case, one brief section from page 316 relates over here that the United States Secretary of State George Marshall had a meeting with the Moshe Sharet, was the foreign secretary of the Jewish Agency. And he was trying to convince this Moshe Sharet that it wasn't worth it for the Jewish Agency to declare a state due to the fact that he thought that the Arab nations that were planning on waging a war against the state would just overrun the Yishuv totally. So here relates the following. United States Secretary of State George Marshall led his visitor, Moshe Sharet, to the map of Palestine on the office wall. Here you are surrounded by Arabs, he said, pointing to the Negev. Here you're surrounded by other Arabs, he said, pointing to the Galil. You have Arab states all around you. Your backs are to the sea. How do you expect to withstand their assault? Believe me, continued the distinguished soldier, Marshall, to Moshe Sharet. I'm talking about things which I know. You are sitting there in the coastal plains of Palestine while the Arabs hold the mountain ridges. Parenthetically, what do we call the mountain ridges nowadays? Anybody know? In 2 words? Yudah v'Shomron. Those places that people want to hand over to the Arabs for them to establish a state. In any case, the Arabs are holding the mountain ridges. I know you have some arms and a Haganah, but the Arabs have regular armies. They are well trained and they have heavy arms. How can you hope to hold out? And in fact, as he describes, and this, and just anybody that reads the history books, you'll read about the fact that the British that were in control till the state was actually established, they were stopping Jews that would have any handguns, while they would permit the Arabs to import a great amount of weapons. And thus, the victory was not something that could be taken for granted. Something which did involve an amazing amount of siyata d'shmaya. One brief example of that siyata d'shmaya I would like to relate. Again, this is from that same book. He relates the following. Just some background to be able to understand this story. The story of the expression of hashgacha and siyata d'shmaya is the following. The Haganah got word of there being a certain ship that was headed from Prague to Lebanon, I think it was, with a shipload of arms that some Arabs had purchased in Prague for the Arab armies. And the Haganah, as I said, got word of the fact that the ship was on the way, and they somehow found out when the ship was meant to leave. So they tried to bomb that ship, initially unsuccessfully. So over here, he relates the fact that there was the plans of the Haganah to bomb that ship. So it relates, this is on page 66, a pair of corpses in each valise wouldn't have been as heavy. Sweating from his effort, the traveler dragged them along, one after the other. Freddie Fredkins was going back to the wars. It had been 5 years since the former RAF ace had touched the controls of a plane similar to the one discreetly parked in the hangar just outside Paris. It was an Anson bomber, the kind of aircraft which Fredkins had flown on dozens of missions over Nazi Germany. With the aid of an old RAF colleague, Fredkins had arranged the purchase of 4 planes for the Haganah's fledgling Air Force. He shoved his heavy pieces on board and clambered up to the cockpit. His first stop was Rome. There he got the final instructions he needed for the assignment awaiting him. It was his twin-engine plane, devoid of any official identification. Fredkins was going to carry out a bombing raid over the Adriatic Sea in the name of a state which did not yet exist. Packed into the pair of valises he had carried on to his plane with such difficulty were 2 100-pound bombs. They would hopefully be the weapons with which Fredkins would sink the SS Lino, a tramp steamer, en route to Beirut. Packed into Lino's hold were 6,000 Czech rifles and 8 million rounds of cartridges. Sector by sector, Fredkins prowled the Adriatic, searching for the Lino. To aid him, he had the exact hour of her sailing, her course, her speed, furnished by Haganah's secret agents in Rome. Despite all that, he failed to discover the ship. After 3 days of futile searching, Fredkins and his old plane were grounded by a furious storm. The following morning, he discovered his missing target, as did almost everyone else in Italy as well, on the front pages of the Italian press. The storm that had grounded Fredkins had driven the Lino in the Italian port city of Malfetta. There, an Italian customs inspector had discovered her secret cargo, and the press immediately announced to the world the arrival of a mysterious shipload of arms in the Italian port. The continuation of the story is also pretty amazing, but the bottom line is that the Haganah managed to sink that ship with all its arms. So again, Im Hashem lo yishmor ir, shav shakad shomer. We need to keep in mind, and I apologize for going over time, but he said supper is 7:30. Is that correct? Yeah. So I apologize. We'll go a few more minutes. I hope the folks back home also. My apologies to your mom for delaying lunch for a bit. The victory in the War of Independence was an expensive victory. Of about 650,000 Jews that lived in Eretz Yisrael at the time, 6,000 were killed, if I'm not mistaken. About 6,000 were killed, and many, many more were injured. And we need to have Hakar Satov to those people that fought the war, to those that were killed, those that fought not only that war, but also subsequent wars, to have Hakar Satov to all the soldiers that put their lives on the line, certain those that gave up their lives, that were able to live in Eretz Yisrael. And that's what Yom Zikaron is all about. I want to share with you a poem. The poem is written in Hebrew. I'll try to paraphrase parts in English. I saw this in some Shabbos Divrei Torah booklet, Divrei Torah pages a number of years ago. It's called Zichrunu, written by a David Bruckenthal. He writes the following. And again, can Zichrunu remember us? And again, they are remembering us, standing at attention, lowering the flags, mourning in the cemeteries, speaking of our deeds and letting out a sigh. But also we, those that were killed, those that are being remembered, we are a great community of thousands of years. We also come to be remembered and remembered together with you. We are here, not only those killed in 1948, those who fought in the ghettos and the Palmach, we're all here from all the generations. Those that were burnt at the stake, all those that were killed al Kiddush Hashem. I am here, the soul of Rabbi Akiva, whose flesh was combed with combs of iron. We are here, those that were tortured in the Inquisition, those that were burnt, and the Crusades. We are all here, Rav Moshe Chaim Lau, the Rav Petrikov, Mordechai Analevich, the commander of the Warsaw Ghetto, those that were killed in Shemeniki massacres, together those that were killed in the Battle of the Kastel, those killed in suicide bombings. We are all joined together. Elazar Maccabi, Shimon Bar Kochba, those burnt in Auschwitz, Treblinka, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. We come to be remembered. Rabbi Amnon Mimagensa, the Rosh Yeshivos killed by the Nazis. We gathered together, those hung in Baghdad, in Damascus, those killed in blood libels. We are all united. Marami Rutenberg, Janos Korczak, and the rows are endless. Those that froze to death in Siberia, those killed in Babi Yar, those murdered in Hebron, in Gush Etzion, Elazar ben Yair Matzada, the Admar Biraj in the Shoah, Kulanu Banu Batznu Kan, Itchem HaChayim, Lizacher Ulazkir. Etzleinu, by us, there's no machlokas, no political parties, no right, no left, no coalition, no opposition. Look at us, we're all here. Nikhalnu la'amod nafshenu v'al nafshechem. V'ish lo yuchal la'amod lefanenu. V'ish lo yuchal la'amod lefanenu. O Hashem sheyatza nishmasenu be'echad, kach kulanu echad. יד אחת, מחזיקים ורוצים בעם ישראל אחד. אנחנו אמנם כבר איננו בין החיים, אך עם ישראל חי לעולמים. זכרונו. Okay. Bezrat Hashem, I hope to continue this talk. Maybe just I'll point out something now somewhat briefly. There was some bread, some bakery, which sold a bread called maybe the company was owned by Jews, Levy's Jewish rye, Jewish style rye bread. Their advertisement was they had a picture of some Chinamen, picture of some Afro-American, some picture of I don't know who, some Indian biting a piece of this rye bread and saying, "You don't need to be Jewish to love Levy's Jewish rye." Now, why in heaven's name am I telling you this? I'm telling you this for the following reason. The issue as to how one views the Medina is not a simple issue. We'll be touching upon it a little bit tomorrow. But we need to keep in mind that the centrality of Eretz Yisrael, the opportunity to live in Eretz Yisrael, is something which is very special and needs to be cherished regardless of what one's political views are. For one to say that Aliyah, why should I think of Aliyah? After all, I don't vote for the Beit HaYehudi or Yamina or whatever the party was called or will be called the next election or Mizrach or whatever. We hope, no, that is a little bit ridiculous. The issue as to what party you vote for, the issue as to what your perspective is on the Medina should not impact the issue as to how dearly you view Eretz Yisrael, how central is Eretz Yisrael within the Torah Hashkafa. So you don't need to be a Zionist in the political sense to love Eretz Yisrael. For one to say, Yom Haatzmaut, it's a regular day for me, there's nothing to think about, because after all, I don't think that the state is something positive, but that's something which doesn't necessarily follow. Regardless of what our political views are, we have to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was knocking on our door and continued to do so throughout the generations, and the fact that we're able to live in Eretz Yisrael is something which is of great meaning and of great significance, and something which we need to be very thankful for. So Bezrat Hashem, I hope we have a meaningful Yom Haatzmaut. Those that are here, and I guess for that matter also those that are there at 9:30 Israel time, there's something doing on the Yeshiva Zoom for Yom Haatzmaut. Certainly it's Yom Haatzmaut might be a good time for a person to learn about topics related to Eretz Yisrael. The Rambam, as I mentioned, the end of Parak Hey of Mamrim, I think it is, speaks about the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure you guys can all access texts that talk about it. So it might be a good idea. That in Bezrat Hashem Mineder tomorrow, together with some amount of Barasha of Mineder, hopefully we'll also continue to speak about Eretz Yisrael and the events related to Yom Haatzmaut. Karabosai. It's been a pleasure. We thank those guys for their suggestions on how to perhaps improve things. Some suggesting some way of making the copies somewhat clearer. Someone will try that. Somebody suggested some way of the quality of the audio being somewhat better. Maybe I'll speak to Yaakov Wolf to figure out exactly how to carry that out. Okay, both sides. Bezrat Hashem. See you tomorrow. And again, do feel free to call. Have a meaningful and a happy Yom Haatzmaut. B'sarot Tovot. All the best. Bye.